evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Howell Township Planning Board Monday, December 1st, 2008.
Howell Township Planning Board, December 1st, 2008. I hereby declare this meeting of the Howell Township Planning Board to be open. Adequate notice has been given pursuant to the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act in the following manner. First, on November 18th, 2008, said notice was mailed to the Asbury Park Press, News Transcript, and Tri-Town News. Second, on November 18th, 2008, a copy of said notice was hand-delivered to the clerk of the Township of Howell. Third, on November 18th, 2008, said notice was posted in the office of the Planning Board and on the bulletin board in the Howell Township Municipal Building, Preventorium Road, Howell, New Jersey. Special notice in accordance with Fire Prevention Code. In accordance with the Fire Prevention Code, be advised that this facility is designed with 3 emergency exits for your safety. The locations are as follows. Upon exiting the meeting room to the rear, they are to your immediate left and immediate right, and at the front of the meeting room at the left of the dais. Furthermore, smoking is not permitted in the municipal building. Please take note that this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcast on Howell Township TV 77. Roll call. Mr. Frazee?
Here.
Mr. Nicastro?
Here.
Mr. Saya? Mr. Schneider?
Here.
Mr. Tantillo?
Here.
Mr. Vislaki will be late. Mrs. Clark?
Present.
Mrs. Dalton?
Late. Should be late.
Mayor DeBella? Chairman Estevez?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I think we have a member who just arrived, so.
Frazee, Nicastro, Saya, Schneider, Tantillo, Vislaki. For the record, Mr. Vislaki has arrived.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and please remain standing for a moment of silence to honor our troops abroad and the victims of last week's terror attacks in India.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This evening's meeting is a master plan public hearing to review the housing plan element and fair share plan. A report will be prepared and given by Jennifer Beam of Birdsall Engineering. The date of her report is November 2008. Prior to Ms. Beam's report, I'd just like to go over some of the ground rules for the meeting this evening. I would like and I would request all the board members to hold their questions until Mrs. Beam's report is totally complete, and then we will open it up to board members. I think that in the fairness to the public and in the guise of continuity, it would be best served if Ms. Beam can go through the report in total, and then we'll reserve our questions for after that. After the board members have gone through their questions, this is a public hearing. We will open this up to the public, and it's my intention that every member of the public that would like to speak will speak. And if we don't finish this evening, then we will move this meeting and adjourn it to, I believe, December 11th.
That's correct.
To continue public comment. Before Ms. Beam starts. Mr. Kuchera, do you have any comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just to help orient the board and members of the public as to why exactly we're here tonight and what our obligations are. During the 1970s and 1980s, our Supreme Court in New Jersey heard several cases that have come to be known as the Mount Laurel cases. Essentially, they were cases brought by several organizations challenging what was known as exclusionary zoning in different municipalities. Some municipalities would take their zoning power and zone the entire municipality large lot in an effort to socially engineer the town and ensure a certain kind of resident. Our Supreme Court held that that kind of zoning was unconstitutional. Not only was it unconstitutional, every municipality in New Jersey has a constitutional affirmative obligation to provide what's known as their fair share of low and moderate income housing. Through the Mount Laurel decisions, the state of New Jersey was compelled to adopt the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act established the Council on Affordable Housing. The Council on Affordable Housing is the state agency which administers all of the affordable housing requirements for municipalities which opt into their jurisdiction. COA comes up with the rules and the formulas which determine every municipality's fair share. In the third round, which we're in now, it's a growth share methodology, which Jennifer will be going over when she does her presentation. But it's a constitutional obligation, not one made by the legislature, not one made by the municipality, but the Supreme Court recognized the constitutional obligation and imposed it on all municipalities. Tonight, we're going to be hearing the Fair Share Plan, which is Howell's effort to comply with this constitutional obligation. As Mr. Chairman just stated, it's part of our master plan. It's the Fair Share Plan within our housing element. Tonight, we will hold the public hearing. If adopted tonight or at a subsequent night, it is then the Fair Share Plan is sent to the Township Council for what's a process known as endorsement. The council doesn't hold the same type of hearing, but they vote to determine whether they essentially agree with the element of our master plan, and then it is submitted to the Council on Affordable Housing. That process at the Council on Affordable Housing is known as substantive certification. If successful, it provides the municipality a measure of protection against what is known as builder's remedies. For instance, if the town had determined it was not going to participate in this process, it was not going to comply with the constitutional mandate assigned by our Supreme Court, it was not going to submit a fair share plan to COA, it would be vulnerable to different developers coming in and suing the town for exclusionary zoning, and essentially those developers would be able to select a project of their choice in a location of their choice with little or no municipal input and build virtually as much as they want. So while it's an option for this municipality or any municipality to opt into COA's jurisdiction and to submit a fair share plan, it's not a difficult weighing and balancing test. There is a severe parade of horribles which befall towns that choose not to participate. With that said, as Mr. Chairman pointed out, Ms. Beam is going to provide the presentation. There will be questions by the board. As with any hearing at the planning board, it will be open to the public for both questions, cross-examination, as well as any testimony. That testimony can come from individual residents. There may be some property owners here with professionals. I'm not sure, but those professionals will have an opportunity to provide testimony as well. However, just be mindful that under the law, any repetitive or irrelevant testimony can be cut off by the board. So if someone has said what you're going to say, has testified to what you're going to testify, you don't have to not get up, but you can get up and maybe speak to a part of it that wasn't expressed fully, or you can stand up and say, I fully agree with Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so who have just gotten up. With that said, I'd like to also direct the board that you're going to be hearing a lot of testimony tonight, both from your own professionals, from members of the public, and perhaps from other professionals retained by those members of the public. I'd ask that you refrain from making any positive statements or critical statements until you've heard all the testimony. It could give the appearance of prejudging. So certainly you can ask questions during that process, but making a positive or not positive statement, I would wait until after you've heard all of the testimony. You can evaluate everything that's being submitted to the board. Once that is completed, the board will take its vote to approve the fair share plan or to direct some changes in the fair share plan. If the board directs changes in the fair share plan and those changes are substantive, then Jen will have to go back and redraft a portion of it, and substantive changes are going to be required to be on file another 10 days before another hearing, because those substantive changes, members of the public and interested parties would not have had an opportunity to take a look at those things and meaningfully participate. And then the plan will be sent up to the town council for endorsement, and then it will be passed along to COA. The time frame for all of this, pursuant to COA's new rules and regulations, is that both parts, our part and the governing body part, must be completed by December 31st.
Thank you, Mr. Cuchero.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to get a paper. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay. You're up, Ms. Beam.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I just want to introduce Andrew Bayer of the firm Gluck-Walrath. He's the township's special counsel for COA matters and has been involved in this process throughout the course of the year as well, and is available for any questions you may have for him in addition to myself.
Thank you.
Just getting started. What is COA? I know a lot of people hear this acronym, not quite sure what it refers to, and I think that Ron kind of described it. COA is the acronym for the Council on Affordable Housing. It's a department that's located in New Jersey's Department of Community Affairs and is in charge of regulating and evaluating and participating in the process of municipalities providing affordable housing. There have been 3 cycles of affordable housing plans. Cycle 1 stems from the litigation that Ron had discussed and went through about 1992. Cycle 2 went from 93 to 99, and cycle 3, which is where we are now, started in 2004 and goes out to 2018. And I know that there's a significant gap there. I think that's based upon the fact that the procedure and how the affordable housing obligation is imposed on varying municipalities changed. Historically, for cycles 1 and 2, municipalities were assigned a number that was based upon a formula that was generated at Rutgers. You were assigned an obligation that you had to in accordance with the regulations, you had to put forward a plan in order to accommodate that obligation. The regulations have now changed. It's using a growth share methodology. So in theory, the number of affordable housing units you are obligated to provide should coincide with the growth on both the residential and non-residential portion of a municipality through planning board, zoning board, building permits, COs, et cetera. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But basically, as many of you may or may not know, the original Cycle 3 regulations were challenged, and in 1997, January of 2007, sorry about that, they were struck down, and COA was mandated by the court to revise the regulations. As a result, the time period associated with Cycle 3 was extended. Originally, it went from 2004 to 2014, but because of the delay in the redrafting of the regulations and the varying stages of adoption of these regulations, that time period has subsequently been extended through 2018. So we're talking about a 15-year time period. Howell is in Region 4. The state is divided up into a series of regions. Region 4 includes Monmouth, Ocean, and Mercer County. And why this is important to note is that the income levels, the sale prices of homes, and the rents that are able to be charged are based on the income, the moderate income of the region as a whole. So that's why there's not one hard and fast sale price. There's not one hard and fast rent. It's dependent upon the region where you're in and the income levels of that region. what I can say is that Region 4 income levels are substantially higher than the region that includes Salem, Cumberland County, where the income levels in those regions are typically lower. So we're certainly not at the level of a Bergen County, but Monmouth, Mercer, and Ocean County does maintain a pretty significant moderate income level, and how these numbers are calculated is based upon that. The income levels, as you can see, and I have one correction, that 42,000 for low, that's for a 4-person unit, not a 3-person unit. But we're talking about people with income here. And this is just an example of the incomes. Actually, there's an entire spreadsheet, and it's based on the number of persons in the house, based on the region. So it ranges from a 1-person house up to a 6-person house. So the occupancy of the house is included in the evaluation of the income levels, the sale prices, and the rents. As you can see from the slide, sale prices, the maximum sale price for a moderate income household, that's $138,000. That's a significant amount of money. If the household was maintaining 6 people and additional bedrooms, that sale price would be increased. In addition, similarly, the rents are based on the number of bedrooms within the unit. The reason I chose to show the gross rents for 2-bedroom units is that based upon regulations from COA, only 10%, a maximum of 10% of any units can be 1-bedrooms. A minimum of 10% can be 3 bedrooms, and the rest 2. So the majority of rental units for affordable housing tend to be 2-bedroom units. So I thought that would be a pretty good piece of information for you to have. Now that also includes those are gross rents. That includes consideration for utilities as well. The third round rolls. So basically, I'm sure you've read in the newspaper or heard that the DCA and COA has determined that statewide, within this cycle, 115,000 units of affordable housing need to be constructed. That goes from 2004 to 2018. And the growth share methodology, as I mentioned earlier, depends upon residential growth. 1 out of every 5 housing units needs to be affordable. And non-residential growth, 1 unit per 16 jobs. Now I want to stop there for a second, because non-residential development is still generating an obligation at the 1 unit per 16 jobs. However, legislation was passed in July of this year, which would preclude a municipality from requiring a non-residential developer from actually providing the units. They are only required to pay the 2.5% development fee. So while non-residential development does still generate an obligation, municipality is only entitled to collect that development fee based on the equalized assessed value of that development. And the growth is a projection. COA has identified what they feel the growth would be for each municipality through 2018, but each municipality is asked to go through a municipal projection of their own based on building permits and COs, and then project them out using a trend methodology. Here in Howell, COA has projected the 3rd round obligation, the gross share obligation, to be 847 units. When we did the municipal projection, it came out significantly higher. Originally, the regulations required municipalities to take on the higher of the 2. Through the course of this year, and as the regulations changed, first there was an adoption in June 2nd of this year. There were subsequent amendments and adoptions in September, and then most recently in November. So through that process, that requirement had changed, which enabled Howell to take the lower of the 2, which is the 847 units. A little history. Yes, we're dealing with round 3 here, or cycle 3. However, Howell was granted substantive certification in '04 for cycles 1 and 2. That certification was challenged because that plan had received a waiver from COA to increase the maximum number of age-restricted units from 25%, which is what the regulations require, to 35%.
Jennifer, excuse me. For the record, Mrs. Dalton has arrived. Okay.
So Howell had requested that age restriction, the 25% age restriction, be waived to 35%. Based upon the court challenge, the court agreed, rescinded the substantive certification. That resulted in a 29-unit shortfall in cycle 2, which has also been incorporated into this plan. So we have the 847 units for round 3 and the 29 units for round 2. In addition to the new construction requirement, municipalities are also required to participate in a rehabilitation program, and the number of rehab units required to be upgraded by Howell is 76 units. This hasn't changed from cycle 2, and we'll talk about that a little later, but basically the town participates in a program through the county and housing services to rehab those units, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So now you're wondering how we get to the 615 units from the 876. Throughout the course of the at least past 4 years, and actually a couple preceding that, the township has been imposing affordable housing obligations on developers as they come forward to both the planning and the zoning board. Many of you have sat on those applications where they come in for a subdivision, and we have required developers to put those affordable housing units in the development. And the reason I'm saying it like that is because that is what we can call an inclusionary development, when we have a combination of market rate units and some affordable units. So over the course of the past several years, we have been requiring those developments. They have been received approval, some have been under construction, so we were able to reduce the overall obligation that needed to be addressed in this plan to 615 units. So we had 3 alternatives. The first is the do-nothing alternative, which I think Ron alluded to earlier. There are many municipalities that have opted not to participate. It's a voluntary program, as we discussed earlier. The second alternative is through traditional zoning, which would be zoning areas of town for inclusionary development, which would be a standard 20% set aside. And what that means is 20% of however many units are proposed would be affordable. And then the third alternative is to identify strategic development alternatives, which would include a combination of projects and programs that would enable the town to achieve the 615 unit number. Credits. So here at the planning board, we went through a significant evaluation process, and we utilized the master plan subcommittee as the venue for that evaluation. Mr. Vislaki was the chairman of the subcommittee, and for about 6 months, we had received a number of proposals from varying entities asking to be included in the plan. So the first thing that we did at the subcommittee was we created the site suitability matrix. And the reason that we did that is that COA has site suitability criteria that they follow in order for an affordable housing unit to receive credit. And there's varying things that they look at. They look at clear title, they look at availability of infrastructure, environmental issues, access to a public street, and the planning area from the state plan. We created this matrix with a ranking system, and my office entered in all the sites, and we had about a dozen requests to be included in the plan. One thing I want both the board and the public to be aware of was that throughout this entire process at the subcommittee, that matrix maintained anonymity for both the developer and the location of the site. It was just looked at with respect to how it met the site suitability criteria. It was only after we had gotten to a certain point where we had ranked the proposals that a committee was formed with the professional staff, members of the council, and members of the planning board to really take forward those proposals and come up with a strategic plan that would achieve the 615 credits in order for the township to receive subcert. So let's look at the first alternative, do nothing. As Ron had mentioned, there's a risk associated with doing nothing. You don't have to participate, but there's a risk associated with not participating. The first is, as we had discussed, the potential for builder's remedy litigation. What that means, and I think that Mr. Baer can talk about it in a little bit more detail, is that the township may lose control of its zoning powers to the court. And typically, when that does happen, the court grants relief from your density requirements, your height requirements, your setback requirements, et cetera, and encourages the provision of affordable housing through whatever means necessary. And in some instances, that results in high-rise, mid-rise development, which I think would be a little out of character with how the township has developed. In addition, litigation is expensive. So these are some of the risks, and I know that Andy has experience where there's been a number of builder's remedy litigation cases currently, even in the midst of all of this uncertainty with respect to how the regulations are going to move forward. Sure.
I just want to give the board and the public an example. There's a case that came out of Little Ferry in Bergen County in the last year, and Little Ferry was a town that had not provided a plan for its share of affordable housing, and there was a lawsuit by a developer who actually was the owner of a garden apartment complex where there was about 25 units per acre at that density. It's a pretty high. It's right on the river in Bergen County. But in any event, the court ultimately awarded the builder's remedy to the builder, and the density that was awarded was 75 units an acre. And so it went from garden apartments to like 8, 10 stories high. So the point is that there is substantial risk to a municipality for doing nothing. You know, the cases are defensible at some level depending on the property owner and the proposed development, but they are expensive, and if you lose big.
The second alternative is your traditional zoning alternative or your inclusionary zoning with a 20% set aside. So to realize 615 units of affordable housing would result in the development of over 3,000 total units within the town. About 2,460 market rate units and 615 affordable units. Typically, when you have traditional inclusionary zoning, you reduce the lot size. You don't typically have 1 acre lots for an inclusionary zoning development of any kind of substantive size. So you would wind up with about 3,000 additional units overall within the municipality. So we opted for alternative number 3, which was to identify strategic development alternatives. We took the site suitability matrix, we evaluated the proposals, and put forward a program that is a combination of actual projects and specific programs through the DCA regulations. And we took advantage of bonus credits that would be afforded to the community for rental units in order to minimize the overall impact to the town. The first project, Block 219, Lot 20, it's located on Southern Road. It's actually quite close to Farmingdale. That's 100% affordable development, 168 units total. The second, Block 143, lots 51, 52, and 53, which is located off Wyckoff Mills Road. It's 60 affordable units, again, 100% affordable, no market rate units proposed. The third, Block 129, lots 85, 87, 88.01, 88.02, which is located on Route 9, is an inclusionary development. This site was and is currently has been currently in your plan for 118 total units, 100 market rate, 18 affordable. The developer had requested an increase in the overall units to 220. with 60 total affordable units. That's a 27% set aside. And because there were already 18 units in the plan, we're only realizing an additional 42 units. We're going to get to it. In addition, we opted to take advantage of a program called Market to Affordable program. That's utilizing your existing housing stock in town. The township would utilize the money in its Affordable Housing Trust Fund to either purchase up foreclosures or subsidize down mortgages and deed restrict the units in accordance with COA's regulations. You can take up to 10% of your cumulative obligation through this program. Your cumulative obligation is over 1,800 units. So we tried to maximize out how much you could actually put in the plan. However, trying to err on the side of realistic, where I don't necessarily know if almost 200 units is a realistic number. So this program takes advantage of your existing housing stock and doesn't add any additional units to the town. In addition, because the units are affordable, you can realize a rental bonus of up to 25% of your cycle 3 obligation, which is 212 units, and we have been able to do that. So at the end of the day, alternative number 3 has resulted in 448 units total, only 160 of which are market rate, and 100 of those were already approved prior. So this proposal only generates an additional 60 units of market rate housing for the town. This is just some detailed information on the specific projects with an aerial photograph identifying where the property is. As I said earlier, it's a 100% affordable project on 30 acres. It has sewer and water. There are no environmental issues that would become an impediment to development. There may be some wetlands in that little forested pocket, but that's not going to preclude the site from being developed. It's located in the SED zoning district and located in a planning area 5. The reason I bring up the planning area is because typically the DCA and COA would like to see affordable housing projects put in a planning area 1, 2, or in a designated center. Howell doesn't have any planning area 1 and doesn't have any designated centers with the DCA. In addition, there's only very little area for planning area 2. It's located along Route 9, some areas along Route 33, and Farmingdale, which we really can't take advantage of that. So what would have to happen is that the COA would have to grant a waiver from this requirement based upon the fact that the majority of the area in Howell is either a PA 4B or a PA 5. And this site is located within the sewer service area and has available infrastructure. I don't foresee that there being a problem with them granting that waiver relief. It has happened in the past for a number of projects in Howell. Project number 2, located on Wyckoff Road. Again, this is a 100% affordable project, 60 family rental units on almost 7.5 acres. There is availability of infrastructure, and approximately 30% of the site is encumbered with environmental features. There is going to be a 300-foot buffer from a C1 stream, and there are some wetlands on the property. Originally, this project had proposed 84 units, but the developer had taken another look at the constraints and had requested to reduce the overall number of units to 60. It's located in an ARE1 zoning district, and it's located, part of it's in a PA2 and the part of it's in a PA 4B. So once again, we would need to get that waiver relief. This is just a little information on the actual group that is proposing to develop these 100% affordable projects. They're called the Ingerman Group. They were established in 1992. They are recognized by the DCA, by COA, by the HMFA, who deals with the financing, and has managed thousands of units nationwide and hundreds here in Howell. In New Jersey, not in Howell. The final development project is located on Route 9. You may recognize this as the AST project from years past. Originally, it was, like I said earlier, proposed for 118 units. 100 of those would be market rate and 18 affordable, which is about a 15% set aside. In addition, this was a settlement agreement site, and there was a piece of open space in the rear of this project that Howell had committed to purchase for about a little less than $1.5 million. The applicant came back and had asked us to consider a revised development proposal that would no longer require that the town purchase that property for $1.5 million, and they would use that additional area, it's about a 30-acre site, to increase the overall development from 118 to 220 with 60 affordable units. That increases the set aside from 15% to 27%, and I will say that that took some negotiating. There is sewer and water. There's nothing to preclude any development environmentally. It's in the HD1 zoning district on Route 9, and it is in a PA2, so no waiver relief would be required. The developer, as I said, was AST. They're a well-known development redevelopment company in New Jersey. They do both residential and commercial development. They are also recognized by the DCA, COA, and HMFA, and has built and managed residential and commercial projects throughout New Jersey. So we're not dealing with people that don't have a proven track record. They develop and manage their projects, so that would not fall to the township to take on that responsibility. This is a little information about the Market to Affordable program. As I discussed earlier, you would use your money out of the trust to purchase foreclosures or other available units, or subsidize existing units through written agreement, and then either sell or rent them to eligible families. They would be deed restricted, but this basically is using your existing housing stock in town. It would not generate any additional units. Finally, the rehab requirement of 76 units. Currently, the township is participating in a multi-jurisdictional rehab program led by Housing Services. The Howell maintains an affordable housing administrator, Maureen Fullaway, who receives all the paperwork, makes sure everything is in order, and Housing Services handles the rehabs. The money for the rehabilitation units also comes out of the trust fund, and they're ranging anywhere from about $13,000 to $15,000 a unit. So basically, that's a description of your fair share plan. It describes the mechanisms and funding sources that will be utilized to address a municipality's rehab share, prior on obligation, and gross share obligation. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jennifer. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the board members for questions. I'd like to do this in as an orderly fashion as possible. So we're going to start on this side of the dais with Mr. Nicastro. Mr. Nicastro, you have the floor first. So do you have any questions for Ms. Beam?
Thank you, Jennifer. Just I'll make a quick statement. Obviously, alternative one, doing nothing, in my opinion, is not an option. And I think the route we took was probably the right option to go. With that said, I just a couple questions on a couple of sites. Maybe you could just help me.
Sure.
And I'll start with the Southern Road. It's my understanding, and maybe for the public's understanding, when these projects come, these projects are not written in stone, because we didn't get the LOI, we didn't get all the information. So I just want to have my understanding, because when I read the whole information that the board received and not the public, I get concerns with environmental issues and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, for example, there's a C1, the Marsh Bog Brook, listed on that property.
You're talking about Whitecoff Road now?
Southern Road. Southern Road. So anyway, reading along, it's in a SED zone, which isn't part of having affordable housing, my understanding. So when we have these issues and they come before the planning board, the project might not be the project that's proposed. Can you address that issue?
Sure. What happens after sites get included in the plan? There's multiple steps that have to be undertaken after the plan is approved and endorsed and sent to the DCA. All projects that are included in your housing element and fair share plan would enter into a developer's agreement with the municipality, and at which time the zoning would be amended specific for this project. Affordable housing zoning is different than other types of zoning in that you can zone specific block and lots for a specific project without running the risk of spot zoning. It's different than other types of zoning modifications. However, they are subject to the same rules and regulations as any site plan or subdivision that would come before the planning board. They would have to prepare plans, they would have to receive all their outside agency approvals, and they would have to go through the process of presenting their proposed project to the board. So nothing, I mean, obviously, what I could say about these particular groups, the two groups that are included in the plan, is that, this is not the first time that they've done this, and typically they do a lot of due diligence before they come forward. However, if in the event that there was some sort of issue from an environmental standpoint and things had to be modified, then we would have to address it at that point in time.
Okay. And also, for example, the next, the White Coffin. You made a claim that it's approximately 7.39 acres. In our report, it shows that probably only 3-point-something acres, 4.21
acres are out of the 7.39. Based upon, we based our assessment on the DEP information. So we didn't go out there and delineate all the sites. That's the applicant's responsibility before he comes forward to the planning board, and they would have to receive all their DEP approvals. They would have to submit a delineation, get an LOI to ensure that that's actually what can be done. But I will say that they did look at it. I don't think they did a delineation, but they did look at it, which is why the original proposal of 84 units was reduced to the 60, because they just didn't think that they could get those additional units on the site based on the environmental issues.
Okay. So again, nothing is written in stone. Once all these, things that need to be identified come to the planning board at the time of development,
Correct.
the projects are subject to change.
Maybe, maybe not. It just depends on whatever they find out in the field based on the outside agencies.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just to respond to Mr. Nicastro's questions also, probably by the time they get to this board, there's not so much change, because whatever they're going to need to do usually gets caught up in the ordinance drafting process. So when the ordinance is drafted, it's drafted with an understanding of which portions of the site are developable and which portions are not developable. There may be some waivers, there may be some variances, but substantively, once that ordinance is adopted, there's not a tremendous amount of change, I don't think, Jen, that you're going to see at the planning board level.
No.
And just one more question. We spoke about the income levels
Yes.
and the type of units. Can you just go over the breakdown of the very low income units, the moderate income units?
There's 3 different levels: moderate, low, and very low. Moderate income is 80% of the median income for the region. Low income is 50.
Do we have that number? Do you have that number?
Yes,
Jen?
I just
Okay.
want to give a
Okay.
little kind of parameter. Low income is 50% and very low is 30%, correct?
Right.
So let's say for a 4-bedroom unit, 4-person household, the median income for the region, and this is 2008, and again, they change annually, is $84,566. That's the median. So moderate income household for 4 persons is $67,653. Low income is $42,283, and very low is $25,370.
Okay, and what's the breakdown of the units that we have to have? How many very low income units, credits? How many low?
50% of the units can be moderate, 50% can be low, and of that 50% low, 13% has to be very low.
So based on our numbers of 615, do we have that breakdown yet?
It's about 80 units, roughly, 80, 82, doing it in my head, because 10% would be 61. Or 61 and a half, so 62. But what we have committed to doing is to ensure that we meet that 13% very low. We can meet that through the Market to Affordable program. We can require that a percentage of the overall developments are very low. But at the end of the day, what I will say is that affordable housing units are not typically occupied by residents that do not have an income. They need to demonstrate an income.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mrs. Clark?
Thank you very much. I have a question about the trend methodology. You
Sure.
talked about that, and if you could just explain how that works into this plan.
Well, we didn't really use it because we took COA's numbers, but basically what happened is that we took the building permits and the COs that have been issued from 2004, January 1st, 2004, through, I think it was the summer, was when we were really pulling together this information. And we separated it based on residential versus non-residential. We reached out to Barbara's office. We got approved but not yet built developments from both the Planning and the Zoning Board, and we created a trend. And basically, we estimated over the course of the next 10 years, really, how many units we anticipate to be developed between now and 2018. And let me tell you, we took a very conservative approach in that estimation. But at the end of the day, if we had to said, well, we're not going to have any development in Howell between 2008 and 2018, they're not going to buy it. So we basically took a trend. We took a minimalist approach given the state of things, and that the building permits and the COs have gone down over time from 2004 to now. But at the end of the day, out to 2018, you still have development occurring here. So it was about 950. That's what we came out with the trend. And so because COA's numbers were about 100 units less, and the regulations had changed, enabling us to take advantage of that, we took advantage of that lower number.
And that was for the methodology that you used was for what period of time did you say that
2004 to 2018.
the period of time that you went and actually looked at
Actual development,
Yes.
2004 to current. So we did the methodology over the summer. So we took, we got all your building permit and CO data, and we also have a list of projects that have preliminary approval, projects that have preliminary and final approval, site plan approval, and we estimated that at some point in time they're going to be in the pipeline.
question about the rehab
Sure.
requirement. At present, you have indicated in your plan it was about 76 units.
That's the requirement.
And you said that in part of your presentation is that 76 units were going to be participated. What is the requirement? If you just explain a little bit about the rehab, what is required for this plan?
It's a program that is offered through the township, and eligible households can participate. They receive a subsidy through this housing services, and then they have to deed restrict their unit for 10 years.
Well, sort of. It's
Go ahead.
yeah, it's actually a loan,
Sorry.
and then it's a loan, and if the unit owner lives in the house for 10 years, it's forgiven. So the property is deed restricted. Well, the unit owner has to pay the township back if they move before 10 years expires.
So from the time that they start the plan, it's from 10 years, not 10 years total they've lived there, but 10 years from the...
From the loan, 10 years from the loan, and then it's, if they need rehabilitation, get the house to certificate of occupancy standards. It's you can't just get it to make your house look nice. You need to actually have a substandard house to be eligible.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Mr. Clark?
No, thank you.
Mr. Borai?
Yeah, actually, I just have one with the Market to Affordable program. You have, I guess, it's, an estimate of 133 units. That's not something we've identified any units for that.
Not
Or
yet.
somebody has to apply.
Yes.
Is that something that somebody would apply for, similar to the rehab?
Yes, we would have to establish a program here in the township, and we had actually discussed this earlier, where you could put information on your website saying if you're interested, please apply, or if people are their houses are being foreclosed upon but don't want to leave and meet the criteria, the town can purchase up those units. But it's a program that would have to be established over the course of the next 10 years. One of the things that I forgot to mention, Mr. Chair, which kind of ties into what you're asking me, is that because this obligation is based on a projected amount of growth, and it's a projection out to 2018, there's periodic kind of checkpoints throughout the process, the first being in 2011, and that's when the town would have to then assess actual growth versus projected growth. So, for example, if nothing really substantial happens between now and 2011, it very well may be that, you know, the 847 number is reduced. But you really have to check, you have to have checks over time, so that's something that I just had forgotten to mention.
So doing something like this now, the 133 is just, you know, it's a ballpark. So we
Right.
could actually, depending on the situation, exceed that,
Up
which
to,
would lower.
up to 180, that's the
Okay,
max.
which would lower our other requirements?
Well,
Or-
Well, it wouldn't lower the requirement, but you, depending again, as Jen was talking about in terms of timing, if there's not much growth which occurs over the next 2 years or 4 years, but yet there's interest in this market to affordable program, you could take more credits from that and perhaps try to adjust one of the other projects, again, depending on
Okay.
how things play out.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Frazee?
Jennifer, I didn't see it in this report you did tonight, but I read it in your report that was given to the planning board. Are we using any RCA's?
we do have some RCA's, and those were RCA's that had been approved by COA, and money had already transferred between Howell and Asbury Park. However, in that legislation that I had discussed earlier that was passed in July that imposed a 2.5% development fee assessment, it basically abolished RCA's. We're no longer allowed to utilize RCA's. So we've only included those that have been approved and money has already changed hands. Those were allowed to remain, but anything beyond that are not permitted.
Just one other question for the public more so. Revenue from our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. What feeds into that for their sake that they know?
Any commercial development that comes online, that 2.5% development fee assessment, that goes into that trust fund. Any development that has an affordable housing obligation that is not providing units would go into the trust fund. Pardon?
Historic.
Yes, any kind of historic development. There is money currently in there. And so as projects come online, and that kind of goes into what will ultimately result from this process is that we'll be updating our ordinances to enable us to increase the amount of fees that we can collect, the 2.5% for non-residential, and the residential fee can go up to 1.5% from 1%. In addition, there is that in lieu contribution fee. So if somebody doesn't generate a full unit of obligation, they would have to pay their proportionate share. We also have in our ordinance in the SED and some of the HD zones, the straight development fee assessment. So that money is what goes into that fee, into that fund.
Thank you.
Mr. Schneider?
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Very good. Jennifer, when COA calculates its town's fair share number, it calculates the number of land that's developable, and some municipalities with limited vacant developable land can request vacant land adjustments, and these adjustments can reduce our fair share number, and they take into consideration a certain number of items such as restrictive covenants that run with the land, such as conservation easements, steep slopes over 15%, if there's a steep slope ordinance, wetlands, floodplains, sites listed in New Jersey Register of Historic Places, and land that a town plans to purchase within 1 year for active or passive recreational purposes. Has this all been taken into consideration by your planning?
It has, Mr. Schneider. We took a look at that, and quite honestly, the DCA has provided a pretty rough estimate. We've looked at it. There is enough developable land within the township that falls outside of those parameters, that falls within areas that are either sewered or within the sewer service area, that would preclude that from working in a community such as this. The DCA imposes presumptive densities based on planning areas on parcels, and we took a quick look, and very quickly it was over that 800 number. So yes, we did look at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jennifer, I just want to say thank you for all your work, and I don't have too many questions since I've been part of the process from the very beginning, but of the 615 unit shortfall, that's between the years of 2004 and 2018, correct?
Correct.
How soon do these units have to be developed?
Well, like I said, there are periodic checkpoints, and they like to see that you're making progress and moving forward. So do all of them have to be developed in the next year? No. But I would say probably a third of it would have to be promulgated before, 2011 and moving forward in that direction.
Now, if the trend analysis, for instance, the economy picks up, development starts picking up, our fair share ordinance that we have in place will adequately provide the required affordable housing that we need without us having to revise our plan, correct?
We have an ordinance in place that requires on-site construction for residential development. So at the same ratio as would be evaluated by the DCA and COA. What I would say, though, is if there is a substantial amount of non-residential development that occurs and the town is not able to impose the actual units on those developers but can only collect the 2.5%, there may need to be modifications at some subsequent point.
Does there get a point where the town reaches build out where the I know the requirements for COA that they look for in the land that we just don't have that available land, and what is the result if that happens?
If the community does reach build out, then I guess a vacant land adjustment, as Mr. Snyder had indicated, would be put forward, and it would be considered a gross share adjustment, and that documentation would be submitted to COA or whomever is evaluating this plan, and those modifications would be made at that time.
Thank you.
Mr. Vislaki.
Talking to the mic.
I just had just two quick follow-ups.
Mr. Bayer, please
Thank you.
use the mic.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Under the new regulations, a town can't have an obligation of greater than 1,000 units, I believe.
Yes.
So you're at 847 now, so when you're talking about a build-out analysis, there's not that you can't reach much, you're pretty close to the cap, just so everyone knows. And the second thing is that, just to follow up what Jen was saying on the gross share, the new regulations sort of changed the concept. Towns now can't require, if you get an approval for 20 units, you can't require 5 affordable. You need to, under the case that set aside the regulations, they talked about providing builders with bonus density, and the way they did it in the new regulations was through presumptive density. So as Jen was saying earlier, depending on your planning area, there has to be a presumptive density of at least a certain number of units an acre. My point is that your gross share ordinance, along with your development fee ordinance, next year will have to be revised, and we'll present that to the council for its consideration.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Vislaki?
No, thanks.
Mr. Tantillo?
Yeah, just a couple of things, Jen. I had a couple of people ask me. I understand it now, but I wish you would do it again, just for the public. You got inclusionary zoning and inclusionary developments. What is the inclusionary rental projects?
In general, inclusionary developments are when you have a combination of market rate units and affordable units combined into one project. Typically, the affordable component is 20% of the overall development. And inclusionary has, whether it's owner-occupied or rental, the inclusionary component of it is not really dictating the ownership status of the units. But when we discuss inclusionary zoning and inclusionary projects, it refers to projects, subdivisions that have been approved by this board that have, the developers have, during their presentation for subdivision approval have committed to, Sierra Builders is one that comes to mind, where they had committed to providing 3 affordable units on site. And we had approved the development with the 3 affordable units on site. That would be inclusionary. So that's where we were able to capitalize on the projects and the affordable units that have been approved
Okay.
by the board.
So, on the map, you have the one, number 10, is it in red? It's and it said inclusionary rental projects, and I see it said 1 unit. Does that mean just,
Just one of the units that are being proposed there is a affordable unit, and that's probably because overall it's like a 5-unit or 6-unit subdivision, and so their obligation was only 1 unit. So they're providing the unit on site, and if there was a fraction, then they would contribute, at 160,000 multiplied by whatever
Mhm.
fraction that was into the trust.
okay, the last thing was, you have in there Adelphia Greens,
Yes.
and it says 72 age restricted. I thought that
Yes.
wasn't age restricted.
Well, what happened was that the information, and we discussed this earlier today, is the information provided back to me by COA is inaccurate. So we'll make that modification. It's not an age-restricted development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mrs. Dalton?
I'm sorry. Can you explain again how the new case affects our growth share ordinance?
Sure. Under the third-round regulations that were in effect before the court set them aside, towns could require property owners or developers to provide 1 affordable housing unit for every 8 market rate, and then 1 unit for every 25 jobs, and that's how your ordinance here was set up.
And that's how it is currently?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
I thought we
We
didn't.
did, but it's going to the 1 to 5.
Well, it will have to be, right, the number,
Right.
the ratios will have to
Oh,
change.
okay, because I misunderstood. I thought you were implying that somehow that 1 to 5 on-site was no longer going to be,
No, I am.
so 1 to 5 is no longer going to
Well,
be,
no, the 1 to 5 is the township's obligation. So
Right.
for every 4 market, you get 1 affordable requirement. What I was trying to say, probably not too, was that the municipalities now cannot impose that directly upon the property owners and transfer that to it under the new regulatory scheme. What you have, the way you would have to do it is through providing at least the presumptive densities in the COA, in the regulations. So like, what's the PA2?
It's 6 units to the
So
acre
if you
with
were in a-
25% set aside.
So if you were in a planning area 2, you'd have to provide a minimum density of 6 units an acre, and you could require.
and 1.5 of those would be, or 1 1/4?
No.
25%.
25%.
Would be affordable.
Right. So,
And
but-
they have to build it?
yes, yes, so long as you provide that density, yes. But
Okay, so it's 25% instead of 20%?
Correct.
Yeah.
In the regulatory scheme, if you're using those presumptive densities. So, for example, in like a planning area 1, which we don't really have here, but it's 8 units to the acre with a 25% set aside. And then it goes down progressively. So in a planning area 4 and 5, with sewer, it's 4 units to the acre. Without sewer, I think it's 2 units to the acre. So it really depends on the specific site how the ordinance would have, the ordinance is going to have to be drafted carefully in order to accommodate the variations.
Yeah, but Angela, the thing that the governing body is going to really have to consider is that what has been presenting here this evening is a plan to meet your 615-unit shortfall. So if this is approved, you theoretically wouldn't have to require additional affordable housing on additional other developments if you satisfy the obligation through this plan.
Okay, but that's what I want to get at.
Yeah.
Those additional developments then, as they come in, are you saying they're not going to have an affordable obligation?
Well, it's twofold. One is that if you provide that, meet those minimum presumptive densities, you could require it, but then theoretically, if you approve all of these projects and require it on additional housing that's not in the plan now, you could be exceeding your number. But you could at least, if you don't want to do that, you could at least require the payment of a development fee rather than building the house.
And just to kind of touch on that, which is I kind of think more in line what you're asking, is that this 847 unit obligation assumes development over the course of the next 10 years. So as developments come in, whether it's a 5-lot subdivision or what have you, that 847 number anticipates that development is going to occur over that next 10-year period.
So
of
then
time.
do we say to those developments as they come along, your obligation is to make a contribution because we've already got these
Yes.
all-inclusive, affordable rental properties, or we've satisfied our obligation? Is
Right.
that's,
And then what happens at these periodic checkpoints, you just make, you check to make sure that your projection and your actual are coincident with one another.
and I want to clearly understand, because I think if, I mean, it seems to me that logically, we're going to do these projects at some point, probably within the first checkpoint period. And if the checkpoint proves that development has slowed and the trend is going in a different direction, but we've already got 2 completely affordable rental, I mean, I don't see, I mean, we're not going to have any opportunity for going backward and not building as much as we're talking about right now, correct?
What I would say is that you already have, from 2004 to 2008, you already have a track record of actual development, which factors into that 847 number. You already have actual development. In addition, you have those units that developers have already committed to provide through the subdivisions. What I would say is that, do I think that there is a possibility that your overall obligation out to 2018 may not be 847? Maybe. But do I think it's going to be reduced so much so that it's going to go backwards? I don't think so.
Well, I agree. I just want to make sure for the purposes of the township, I mean, well, there's no point where we're going to be able to say to a builder who's already got this plan approved, hey, we don't need that many units, cut it back.
You may. I mean, you could certainly ask.
They're going to have remedies against us if we do that, correct? I'm just looking at what in the
Yes.
future is going to happen
Well,
as
would
everyone.
you would be in a fight. It's
Yeah.
fair to say you would be in
Yeah.
a fight. The other thing I would say is that I think it's the township clearly has the right to phase these the projects that are in this plan, phase it in over time. You certainly don't need to have these rezoned and approved within the next year. I mean, I think depending on the growth and depending on the success of this other program, the market to affordable. So I think it really will depend what happens a little over the next couple of years.
Now, with the market to affordable, those will be deed restricted as a consequence of the compensation that the homeowner is receiving.
Correct.
And those are deed restricted for what period of
30
time?
years.
30 years.
At least 30.
Okay, so they can be sold, but and now, when we talk about deed restricted, the number in here that stuck out at me for a moderate house, for a market unit, was, I think, 138,000?
That's an affordable unit.
That's an affordable unit.
Correct.
So that doesn't mean that people who put their homes into the program, by virtue of this market to affordable program, their houses aren't going to be restricted to 138,000. They are?
What would happen is, I think that Andy would be a better position to answer this, but through the agreement that you would enter into with a resident, they would be afforded the opportunity to sell the unit for 5% over the affordable price at that time. So it's not going to be stuck at 138, whatever the number is when the 30-year restriction is over, at plus 5%.
Okay.
But it's going to be in the ballpark of that 138 number plus. It will increase a couple points every year.
So we're anticipating housing in around that is worth about that to begin with, somewhere in that, maybe
I would say
slightly.
like about 200,000 because the
Yeah.
subsidy is about 50,000 plus or
Okay.
minus.
And then we already have the rehab program?
Yes.
And do you know offhand if anyone has taken advantage of that?
Yes.
Yeah, they have.
They have. I think that there's been at least 7. I think there's
Okay,
7
good.
units that have been rehabbed.
Because I think that last year, or some way midway through the last 2 years, the township did start advertising that or trying to let people know that that program is out there for them. Finally, I would not be me if I didn't ask about what possible opportunities to outfit or rehab or assist those who probably are in the most needy of circumstances, those who live in our mobile home parks, and what if anything, was looked at as far as trying to get those into a program.
We reached out multiple times. We sent certified return receipt letters. We made phone calls. We sent additional letters. We did not receive one single phone call back.
Would any of those mobile homes be eligible for the rehab program?
Yes.
They are?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about the moderate to affordable?
We
I
would
mean,
have to
I'm
look
sorry,
at-
the market to
I would
affordable.
have to look into that a little bit more. I think that they probably would be able to be eligible for that. It might be just a little bit more complicated based on the
Okay.
ownership situation, but I think that that would be something that we could work out in that program.
Terrific, thanks.
Any other questions, Mrs. Hoffman?
Sorry.
Okay, I get to go now. Great. I have some questions for both Mr. Bayer and Ms. Beam. I'll start with you first, Mr. Bayer. I'm sure that a township would look at its strategic position before it decided which one of the three options it would pick, whether to not participate, whether it be to put inclusionary housing or to do a strategic development plan. Could you give me an example of a town? What type of township in the state would decide not to participate in this plan?
I could answer that, actually.
Well, great, that'd be fine.
Some of the shore communities in Monmouth
That have no
County,
developable
they have no
land.
land, you know, so those tiny shore communities, Manasquan, Brielle, Spring Lake Heights, although I will tell you that some of them are participating, but, you know, their obligations are like 1, you know, 2, but, you know, the risk is minimal because they don't have developable land. Some of the built-out communities in Bergen County, although that didn't really work out because of the redevelopment alternatives up there, but some of the built-out communities in Bergen County also are opting not to participate.
So really, the structure of the township would depend on, so would you say that some of the townships that are in special planning districts, like the Pinelands
Correct,
and the
and the Highlands.
Highlands district, would be in a better position to be a township that has developable land, but they don't
Although, yes, because of the restrictions, overall
on
restriction
their
on
master
development.
plan? Okay.
Yes, although I will tell you that I represented Pinelands Town that has a pretty high affordable housing number for a small portion of their community that is developable. But yeah,
Okay.
that's,
And, Mr. Chair, I think actually a lot of the Highlands communities you're going to find are going to participate in COA, because when they opt into the Highlands, they're going to get a reduced number based upon memorandums of understanding that COA and the Highlands have. So there's a lot of incentives for those communities actually to get involved, because it's going to reduce their numbers.
Thank you. My point is that, in your professional opinion, that's not a viable option for Howell Township, is
That's
it?
correct. No, I don't think so.
and I absolutely concur.
Mr. Bayer, do you know about the makeup of COA? Do they have an economist on their staff? Do they have any economists on their staff?
I don't believe so.
So they really don't. They really don't have anyone that crunches numbers and says that it'll be feasible to build 115,000 affordable units in the state of New Jersey in the next
Well,
9 years.
On their staff, that would be true, but I will say that when these new third-round rules were developed, COA outsourced the methodology to consultants out of the University of Pennsylvania, paid them a lot of money to do so. So there was and they've issued substantial reports. So there were economic studies done, not in developing the methodology, which is the subject of substantial litigation, by the way.
That being said, and that was just a question leading into how often do we do a recertification to see if our obligation is going down, or
Every 2 years.
every 2 years? Okay.
You check your growth and have to report to COA on a biannual basis.
Okay. Jen, I have a question for you regarding the occupants of the rental properties. They have to be income qualified, obviously.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is the income qualification a two-pronged process? Number one, they can make more money than the program requires, but they still have to be making at least as much money as the program requires. Is that correct?
I don't think there's a minimum requirement. I think that there's a maximum requirement, but there is a two-pronged process involved. Families or individuals would have to become income qualified. That's a process through the DCA, through COA, and there's eligibility lists. Developments have to be affirmatively marketed, and that means that they have to have information in the newspapers, et cetera. And however, there also are selection criteria that the owner of the project can impose. I've had experience, not specifically in this instance, but in instances in other municipalities near here where, criminal background checks are undertaken, so they have the right to refuse occupancy to those that don't fall within their criteria. Now, that's not published information, what their criteria is. I'm sure that that's something that the township was interested in pursuing. I'm sure that they would make that available to you, but it's not something that's standard through the state. But I do know that there are definitely background checks done. There are, social security numbers that need to be provided. They have to provide tax returns. And so there are definitely selection criteria above and beyond just basically income.
Well, and just to supplement, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Just, they have to, well, there's no minimum requirement. They have to be able to pay, they have to make
Yes.
enough income to pay the month on a monthly basis.
On their own, without any kind of rental subsidy,
It is
isn't
not,
that correct?
let's be clear, this is not Section 8
Thank
housing
you.
at all.
Thank you. My next question, Jen, is a follow-up to the question regarding the renters. The developer that has come to the township to develop the 2 rental sites. I had the ability to go visit 3 of the sites that they own right now and manage. But I want to get this on the record. I know the answer to these questions. I think it's important we get these questions on the record. They manage those properties
correct.
for their own. They don't hire out the management. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there's an on-site manager on
Yep.
all those properties. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I also understand that they're in the affordable housing game. The end goal for them, the light at the end of the tunnel, is when that deed restriction expires, because they would look to sell that unit as a market rate unit eventually. So, is that kind of like they have skin in the game?
Absolutely.
Okay. So it's in their best interest to maintain those properties.
Yes, and this particular entity, they don't flip their projects. They keep control. They actually purchase the property themselves. They build and manage the units themselves.
Mr. Chairman, how long a period before they can do that?
30 years.
There's a 30-year deed restriction on any affordable unit.
And Mr. Chairman, just as a follow-up, these developments, rentals are usually financed through a tax credit program, and which is administered through a New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency. And the developer usually has equity investors. And going back to your other point, which is that they have to ensure that they're making the rental income because they have to answer to their investors. And that's why they manage the properties, because they want to maintain them, ensure they're going to meet their obligations to their investors.
Thank you. I just have a few more questions. My next question is in regard to RCAs, and it could be for either one of you. We know that new legislation was recently passed that did away with regional contributions. So we can no longer move any of our affordable housing obligation to an area that wants to redevelop. For instance, Camden, Trenton, or whoever's redeveloping their cities. We can no longer, but we do have an affordable housing trust, and we will have money going into this affordable housing trust. Now, I'm under the impression, and I'm asking if it's right or wrong, that if we don't use this money in the RCA, then Trenton can decide how that money gets used and could give it to another municipality to meet their affordable housing obligation.
Yes, under the A500 legislation that passed, there are many towns, especially suburban communities, that have amassed a lot of money in their affordable housing trust fund and have not spent it. So the legislation mandates that if you don't have a solid plan to spend the money within 4 years, the money goes to the state, and the state then redistributes it to whoever they so choose.
So is this part of the methodology in including our market to affordable program in our fair share plan?
Yes, it is, as well as the rehabilitation component of the fair share plan.
I have a couple of site-specific questions, and I'll be completed, so please bear with me. I have some questions on the Wyckoff Road site.
Sure.
The buildable envelope of the site, and I did read the entire plan. It was good for me because I had some trouble sleeping at night, so after I started to read it, I fell right to sleep. But I'd like you to verify something that's written. The envelope, the buildable envelope, meets all the buffer requirements that are on record in Howell Township right now. Is that correct?
We did take into consideration the riparian buffer as well as the GIS wetlands, et cetera, when we came up with that 4.21 acre.
Good. Could you tell me how many acres, buildable acres of that property are in the PA2 zone?
Not off the top of my head, I would say probably like half. I would say about half and half.
And I want to confirm some of the surrounding zoning, because, my concern is if the project's suitable. We have zoning there on neighborhood commercial, is that correct?
Yes.
And also we have affordable housing site 1 zoning. So part of the structures inside of that area are already in our affordable housing plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, could you tell me which ones those are?
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Delphia Greens
Okay.
was included in the plan. And let me just give me 1 second to pull that information up. I'm sure that there are plenty of residents here who know this way better than me, but let me just pull this up. There are a number of sites in the area that are included in the plan from the subsequent rounds. Sorry. And the Villages is located in that area as well.
Okay.
I don't think that they're deed restricted as affordable units, but I think that they're of a density and.
They're of a density that would be similar to any. Okay. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. Adelphia Greens, that's fine. And then I have 3 comments I'd like to make, and I'd like you to verify that the selection process and this plan reflects those comments.
Sure.
When we met at the beginning of the year, the master plan subcommittee and the board charged you with certain things when we were putting together this fair share plan. Some of the things we charged you with was we would like to see a plan that required Howell Township to build the least amount of units possible.
That's correct.
We also wanted to visit and have the ability to include existing housing stock in the plan somehow.
That's true.
Okay. We also charge you with reviewing every single affordable unit that has been built or is scheduled to be built inside the township, because we wanted the entire township to be bearing the brunt of affordable housing, not just a section of the township.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
Yes.
And we also wanted to build a plan that limited the amount of market rate units to the best of our ability.
Yes,
Are you confident that you accomplished this?
I am. Based
Okay.
upon the proposals that were put forth and the regulatory restrictions imposed by the DCA, I think that we have achieved those goals by only proposing 448 units, 160 of which are market rate. The remainder are affordable, as well as the market to affordable program that utilizes the existing housing stock in town.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any further questions. Based on the questions and cross-examination from other board members, is there anyone else that would like to add anything?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have another question.
Sure.
Jennifer, recently there's been some publicity
Yes.
from,
Excuse me, bear with me for 1 second, so this is not a distraction for everybody. My kid's up on the screen.
Yeah, the beach is quite a distraction for
Sorry.
me right now.
they're adorable.
They are.
Recently, there's been some publicity from neighboring municipalities as to what they could do to alleviate, in this economic downturn, problems with people, especially lower income people, having foreclosure problems. And am I correct that the money in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, could this be used for such a program?
Yes.
Rather than the state taking back the money? Now, this is not in this plan, or is it?
It is, to a certain extent. That Market to Affordable program could take advantage of foreclosed properties, which would enable a lower income resident, assuming income qualification and willingness to participate in a deed restriction, that they would be able to stay in the unit. Also, you can utilize the existing housing stock, and if somebody opts not to stay in the municipality, they can then, the township could utilize that existing housing unit and then deed restrict it and either sell or rent it to somebody who would meet the income qualification. So you're using your existing housing in order to meet a portion of your obligation.
So what does the community, the governing body, and the planning board, what do we have to do to jump feet first into this program? Because to lose the money to the state, to me, is ludicrous. And since we do have this amount of money and this can be done, what has to be done?
Well, we have a spending plan which identifies the rehab program and this Market to Affordable program, which goes out to 2011, which is your first checkpoint, and that was the first communities that have no plan in place to spend the money. You don't have to spend it, but you have to have a plan in place to spend it. And this plan does accommodate that, which through that program as well as the rehab program, there is a plan in place to spend this money in order to prevent the state from taking it.
And we'll be recommending to the governing body setting up, I guess, standards that will qualify people for the program, as well as what they'd have to do to.
So in the next 6 months, for example, you will be recommending to the governing body for them to be able to reach out to people that have lower income units that are having problems meeting their mortgage payment, to readjust their mortgages by this kind of financing, and that would be applied to our obligations.
We would, that's the 133 units that we had discussed through that Market to Affordable program. We would have to establish a program. That would be the first order of business through the governing body, come up with protocols and parameters, and then put out some advertising, whether it be through posting on your website or mailers or what have you, to advise the community that this program exists and ask for residents to come forward and participate.
Okay, so this, you anticipate, will be done?
Yes.
Very good, thank you so much.
Any other comments from board members?
Mr. Chair, I just got a quick one. The special needs and supportive housing, just can you touch on how much we reached, because you know, I know there's a shortage of special needs housing in New Jersey. It's near and dear to me. So can you touch on how much we reached out to try to get more special need housing?
We reached out. There was one group home that had been included in your plan previously. However, all the documentation had not been in place. So we spent a lot of time working with them, making sure that they have their licensing in place and that their financing is in place and all that documentation is in place. To date, we have not received any other inquiries or requests for those types of units. However, if those developments come online, adjustments can be made at those periodic checkpoints to the plan that would enable those units to receive credit, assuming that they're willing to get licensed or and go through the eligibility criteria.
And those credits are still two to one, like a rentable?
Well, we took advantage of the maximum rental bonus that you can get. Okay. And there's a difference between how we have taken credit for that rental bonus than in years past. In years past, people would come to the board and say, oh, I have this rental project, you're going to get 2-for-1 credit, and this is going to be great for the community. However, there's a maximum rental bonuses that you can take. You first have to, there's 25% of your overall obligation has to be rentals. So those first 25% receive 1-for-1 credit. The next 25% receive 2-for-1 credit, and then anything beyond that just gets the straight 1-for-1. And so what we chose to do, instead of creating inequity in how we were assessing each of these projects, we didn't impose the 2-for-1 credit on any of those projects. We just said we're going to maximize the rental bonus as a separate line item, so each of the projects would be evaluated on basically what they actually are providing.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Mr. Chairman, one just short point.
Yes, Mr. Schneider.
How is Habitat for Humanity, or these kind of organizations playing into our plan?
To date, there are no Habitat units identified in the plan. Should Habitat units come online over the course of the next several years, like I said, amendments to the plan can be made at those periodic checkpoints in order to realize those credits, and the market to affordable program could be modified, or other modifications could be made at that point in time.
So this particular application that may be coming towards us in the future that could contain Habitat for Humanity, could be,
Talk about
Mr. Chair,
included.
well, I mean, each one of those applications, we just have to assess on their own merit. If the application comes in, and any application comes in and it involves Habitat for Humanity, I mean, the board has never taken any position other than encouraging the maximum amount of affordable housing, in every project.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, before we open this up to the public, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Thank you.
The board will now reconvene.
Good evening. At this point in the hearing, I would like to open up to the public. If you are interested in making comment or speaking to any of the professionals that spoke tonight, please line up on this side of the room. Thank you.
Oh, this was an honor. Good girl.
You don't. I recognize you, Mrs. Smith. No problem.
And Mrs. Dixell, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state and spell your name and give us your address.
Barbara Dixell, Dixel, The Villages, Howell Township. I'm going to have to put this down because I have to speak at the same time. With reference to the Wyckoff Road property, could you break that down for me again? How many acres is the total?
7.39 acres.
Okay, out of that, what is available to be built on?
Approximately 4.2 acres.
Okay, out of that, what's the breakdown for low income, moderate income, low? I need to know what that is.
50% mod, 50%
Wait,
low.
50%, hold on, mod,
50% low.
50%. Any very low?
To date, we're looking to impose the very low on the market to affordable program, which would accommodate, the towns for very low obligations.
So in other words, that does not include that property?
Correct.
Okay, now let me ask you another question. There are a lot of environmentally sensitive issues there. There's the Bethesda Methodist Church Cemetery is on both sides of the road. It's founded in 1700s.
Mrs. Dixell, I'm sorry, I have to correct myself. 8 of the units on that property would be very low. I'm sorry, I have to
Eight
correct
out of
myself. Yes.
the 8 out of the
The 60.
Okay. So in other words, 8. Okay, so 8 out of the 8 of very low. So, all right, so the other numbers change also?
Well, so it would be 30 moderate and 22 low.
Okay. All right, and they're all rentals?
Yes, they are.
And, okay. Now, we have the Long Brook, which is part of our drinking water, that goes through that property. It goes all the way through to Route 9, it crosses under Route 9, goes all the way, meets the Manasquan River at Moore's Landing. So, okay, the roadway is 2 lanes, very narrow. There's a lack of parking at the post office, and there's double and triple parking all over the place. You need to be aware of that. There's been some pretty near bad accidents over there. The Villages has 671 units, 1,000 people. That's also, it's impossible, and you have to be aware that Wyckoff Mills Road is a direct cut-through to Halls Mill Road at all hours of the day, but in the rush hour, it's lunacy, insanity. You can't get up or down that road at all. Okay, Adelphia Greens is a few hundred townhouses. We're very high density now. So we're going to be more high density then? The whole area is very high density.
This would contribute, I don't think it's inconsistent with the area, but yes, this is going to add 60 units to the area.
Okay, are they going to take extra special care for this cemetery and not to damage anything, considering it dates back so historic?
What I would say is that that project, assuming the plan is approved and endorsed and receives substantive certification by COA, would be the subject of a site plan application, and at which time all of these provisions could be addressed with respect to the road, the traffic, the cemetery, et cetera.
Okay, and also Clayton Avenue is a one-way street. It is so narrow, one car can barely get through. And that's next to the post office, and there's all kinds of traffic problems. And all of this will be addressed with that?
It would be something to address at site plan.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a one-way, it's a two-way.
No, the township made it back, I thought.
All these issues
I thought
with
there was
respect to
a recent,
the issues with respect to the circulation, the parking, environmental issues, they'll all be addressed at site plan.
Mr. Meyer, you swear or affirm the testimony you have to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name and give us your address.
Stephen Meyer, M-E-I-E-R, 56 Adelphia Road, Farmingdale. Jennifer, well, I know we're going to go into this in more in depth at the board, the zoning board meetings. Considering the portion you've already taken care of as far as the obligation with what you have in the plan, the projects which come through Board of Adjustment being they're not in your figures at all, are they still advantageous to bring those numbers in?
Absolutely.
So it's not anything where we're going to end up be penalized down the road for having too many?
What would happen is that at those periodic checkpoints, we would take gauge of how many units we have, and that at that point in time, we can make the adjustments necessary with respect to, depending upon the success of the Market to Affordable program, we may need to make adjustments with respect to that program, et cetera. So yes, the units that are approved through the zoning board would be part of the township's meeting their obligation, yes.
Mr. Chair, I just want to expand on that a little. The plan that you've put together, however, Jen, it takes care of all of our numbers going through the third round.
It does, out to 2018, yes.
So it's not necessary to this plan that anything be approved elsewhere or at the zoning board?
No, it's not necessary, but if those units were approved, then the township could seek to gain credit for those units.
It would be surplus.
Correct, well,
And-
right, we can take a look at these periodic checkpoints, and if adjustments need to be made, we can make adjustments at that point.
And it certainly doesn't absolve any applicant at the zoning board from having to satisfy its positive and negative criteria for a use variance.
No, it doesn't.
And these statements here today don't, because these projects are not in our fair share plan, shouldn't be used at the zoning board by an applicant to say that my project should be approved because there are statements made generically here at the planning board tonight, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I think you just, between the two of you, answered the rest of the question.
Mr. Smith, you swear or affirm the testimony about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name and give us your address.
Don Smith, 54 Vanderveer Road, Howell. Steve just asked one of the questions that I was a little concerned about. So I guess we would end up with a surplus. It wouldn't reduce our obligation. Since, in other words, you have 3 rental units that you're putting into your plan now. And there's one before the zoning board that's proposing 50 rental units on site.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I addressed this a little in the last one. We can't deal with the merits of use variance applications at the zoning board. To the extent, I mean, all these sites existed and a plan was put together and it didn't include those sites. As I said before, those applicants have to make their positive and negative criteria.
I'm not looking at it from that angle, though. What I'm looking at, I think you stated that we would just end up with a surplus. It wouldn't reduce those 3 units that you're already talking about tonight.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think the way Jennifer had answered it before was to say that every 2 years, the town has to evaluate where it is in terms of the number of units it's been obligated to produce, depending on the number of overall units which were produced. So we'll be able to, if the zoning board approves a project which provides affordable units, the town can then take credit for it, but it would have to evaluate the other projects which are currently in the plan and the phasing in of those projects in terms of its overall obligation.
Okay, so these 3 that you're talking about tonight, they would be phased in over a period of time. Okay, that would balance out. My fear is that in 1989, we had a lot of ML zoning, Mount Laurel zoning. And it was all developed with high-density Mount Laurel zoning, but we got not one single low, moderate housing unit provided. Adelphia Greens itself is one of them. Country Meadows, too. I mean, and they're all in the same area as the Wyckoff Mills Road site. My other question is, you mentioned that they did an economic study, but when that study was done probably predated the current downturn in our economy. So really, I'm afraid that I can't put much faith in that. I don't know, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I don't see our economy getting better within the next year, 2 years, probably not even 3 years. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I need to know how this is going to affect the township in regards to the economy.
Well, I think Mr. Bayer had alluded to the fact that when the regulations were revised pursuant to the appellate division decision, they subconsulted out to a group from the University of Pennsylvania who conducted a series of studies. And I don't disagree with you that those studies were done prior to this current economic crisis that we're in. I mean, they were done at the end of last year, maybe the beginning of this year, before we even really started to take this hard downward turn. How that's going to affect Howell, I don't really know how to answer that. I know that there is pending litigation challenging that very thing. Currently, there has been no decision to date, and I don't anticipate seeing a decision prior to December 31st. So I don't really know how to answer that other than to say that that very subject that you just mentioned has been the subject of those lawsuits that are pending before the court.
Okay, and my last question, is there a way that the Environmental Commission could get a copy of the sites, just so we could look it over and get an idea, compare it to our environmental resource inventory as far as endangered species, plants, whatnot on site, and just get an overall
There's a copy on
look at
file with Barbara at the planning office.
Well, I'll call Sue tomorrow then and see if she can make arrangements, or maybe your chairman could bring his copy with him if he's going to be there.
I'd like to keep my copy, so we'll get you an extra one.
Okay, thank you. I'll call Sue tomorrow and make arrangements. Thank you.
Okay, Elsa Wisner, 376 Conover Street.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I swear. I just wanted to commend the committee. First of all, I know how much work goes into putting a master plan together and how many weekends, I guess, you've spent here. It looks like you did a thorough job. I just wanted to voice some concerns that I had. Particularly, I guess and those of you who know me, I've always kind of wanted to maintain and protect the rural nature of this town. And one of my concerns has always been a lot of building that's going on and cutting down of trees. And with that in mind, with the plan that you have in front of you or that you've been discussing this evening, I would just ask that you do pay attention, and I guess you have, but to the height restrictions, but height of buildings. Some of the lots seem awfully small, and how high are the buildings going to be? We have to do COA, we have to have the buildings going in, but if we could at least pay attention to trying to make it as rural as possible, lower the density wherever possible, spread it out wherever possible, keep the height down a little bit. And the waterways. My other concern is the 100% non-exclusion or the non-inclusionary sites. Those are going to be sites with families?
They're all non-age restricted, yes.
Okay. I don't know if anybody here really has an opinion on it, but it just seems like it would have a stigma attached to it. It's like the projects when you go to school, especially, kids are cruel, saying, oh, that's where you live. I don't know, they make me a little uncomfortable. I really like the inclusionary aspect better where it's a mix of people in the area, but those are your decisions, so for what it's worth. Thank you.
Mr. Ryan, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record and give us your address.
Rick Ryan, 1329 Maxim Southern Road. Just a disclaimer, I'm speaking as a citizen tonight, not in any capacity as a zoning board member of Howell Township. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board, and professionals. Thanks for a great job. I just have some comments and a question. COA is like no other issue locally that has the capacity to completely and permanently change the very character and fabric of our community. Doing nothing and not becoming compliant with our round 3 obligation was not an option. So I agree with the option that you took. The planning for this is so critical. If it's not done properly or if it's done poorly, the consequences to the town and the taxpayers are grave and they're permanent. I like to see the nice mix of options that were chosen for this plan. Great methodology. Reminds me of the statute for justice, where it's blind, and it's a good way. It's a good way to look at it. And I think there was a great process between the board and the professionals and the council in coming up with this plan. I'm a particular fan of the Market to Affordable program. It's a very attractive alternative for the town to meet our obligation. The rehab program also. This COA is born out of a lawsuit with minimal implications to one town, and like everything else in the state, it's morphed into a statewide nightmare with just devastating consequences to the very character and fabric of our towns, municipalities, and cities. This plan appears to require building a minimal amount of new construction. It's a very positive plan. In light of the fact that we can no longer do RCAs, we have to build something. Something's going to have to be built in Howell. And I think out of all the options available and choices that the board and the committees and the master plan subcommittee had, this was a very excellent plan that came together. So thank you for your hard work. The question I had, I asked Jennifer and Ron a little bit earlier, when the state shopped around their round 3 obligations to the various communities and they allowed public comment, one of the things that folks constantly talked about was the vacant land study that the state performed and how that factored into the individual municipalities' obligations. And I had asked Jennifer, and I'd like to hear Jennifer and Ron explain that a little bit. What happened when COA took a look at that? You know, COA agreed to take a look at the vacant land study and say, well, some land is not developable. It's environmentally constrained, and I know Howell has got a lot of those constraints. So I was wondering how we fared when the state took a look at the vacant land study.
What I can say is that when the consultant for the DCA evaluated vacant land, they did it on a county-by-county basis. They didn't get down and do a lot-by-lot analysis of each and every municipality. They did it based on existing mapping information that they have, and what resulted from that, which you can find on the COA website, is a breakdown of the vacant area by acre, broken down by region. And unfortunately, Region 4, which is what we're in, had one of the higher amounts of developable vacant land as opposed to a lot of the other regions in the state. So what I can say is, did they go and do a lot-by-lot assessment and do delineations of every piece of property in the state? No. They based it on available mapping, a lot of DEP data, and other data that they were able to get. And so as a result, there really wasn't a substantial change in the obligation to Howell, other than to say that because of the extended time period, the obligation went up from the last go around. It went from like 600 and something up to this 847, because now we have an additional 4 years to account for.
Okay, that completes my comments and questions, and I'd just like to close by thanking you for all your hard work, your dedication, your volunteerism. It's a commendable thing you do. I know some of you up here are missing some key events in your children's lives tonight by being here and doing the work for the people and volunteering your time to do so. And I'd like to see more people like yourselves get involved and help the town out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You too, Rick. We thank you for yours, too.
Thank you.
Mrs. Smith, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I swear.
And please state and spell your name for the record and give us your address.
Pauline Smith, 54 Vanderveer Road. On the tiniest patch you ever saw of what's left of rural because of this nonsense. I'd like to begin, there's quite a few questions and quite a few comments. I'd like to begin where Rick left off. How could they possibly say they gave a fair assessment to open land when they didn't consider the thousands of acres, Earl, the reservoir, all the park space, a big chunk of Howell Township that we're being penalized for because they didn't do their job? We should be screaming. We should be objecting instead of just acquiescing to all this nonsense. Mr. Baird, do you have any comments? I mean, it seems to me a legal thing.
I could tell you that the 250 towns have joined a lawsuit challenging the regulations to the League of Municipalities, asserting one of the arguments is exactly what you're saying. As Jennifer pointed out earlier, in terms of the vacant land in Howell, I think there's enough other developable land that where doing a vacant land adjustment to reduce the number didn't work for Howell, but certainly the state reaching the number of 115,000 units statewide based upon developable land is being challenged by the league on behalf of the towns.
Well, I think we should be challenging it as someone who has been very involved for a lot of years with the situation in Howell Township, with our land. Why is there so little PA2 and no PA1? Because we are not buildable. We have building done on land that should have never been built on, and we live with the result of it. We live with the flooding, for one thing. That's why we should have more 6-acre zoning. not more high density, which this gives us. You don't, there's no answers? No way out of it?
Mrs. Smith, I really believe that question is a wonderful question, but I don't think it's for this forum. We have to put a plan in place, and we have to do it by December 31st. That doesn't preclude us from challenging COA's decision, but if we don't have something in place on December 31st, the alternatives could be catastrophic for us.
I understand that.
So if you're interpreting the fact that we are acquiescing by putting a plan in place and are not going to go through the legal avenues we have to, I don't know if fight is the correct word, but to challenge COA, that's not what we're trying to have you perceive. But we do have to put a plan in place. A plan in place allows us to fight for another day.
But I hope you understand, once this plan is in place, we are stuck with it.
No, we're not, because if the legal challenges, the plan can be amended based on any legal challenges that are won, so.
Mr. Chair, also, and I've gone through this many times when Pauline was on the board. As we said earlier, if you chose not to put the plan together, and you chose to go, just join the League of Municipalities lawsuit, and you left yourself vulnerable to the builder's remedy, you'll get higher density housing, most likely.
I want you to understand, I'm not suggesting that.
Okay.
I just don't like the impression I'm getting that everything is all nice, because it's not.
I can tell you that many municipalities have raised the same concerns that Howell has. I'm involved in one municipality in Morris County where a good chunk of their developable land is the Picatinny Arsenal,
Yes.
where they bury bombs and things like that. COA considers that developable land. So the problem has been playing itself out, and COA has been made aware. COA obviously hasn't taken it really seriously. So it's not a lack of information that COA has, it's a lack of inclination to do anything about it.
And I do understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go on to the next thing then. If this plan is put in place, and I'm not necessarily saying at this point that it shouldn't, some plan put in place, whatever plan is put in place, doesn't include certain things, and I know that there are challenges out there. I know there's the Elon situation that we've been fighting for, 12 years maybe, and other things that have been mentioned here and some not. What happens when our plan is complete, or we think it's complete, and they make a challenge to COA, and we're going to be stuck with them too?
There's anyone who files an objection to our fair share plan, and this is one of actually the beneficial reasons of going through COA, is you're put into a mediation process. It could be a lengthy mediation process depending on how many parties are out there, but the fact is that the challenge doesn't take the form of a builder's remedy. It takes the form of that mediation at COA, and you're protected during that time period.
Well, I'm going to say the experience of observing the first round, participating in the second round, and now observing the third round, I don't agree with that. We get stuck every single time.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Mrs. Smith, one of the goals I set forth at the Master Plan Subcommittee, and you can ask anybody who was at this meeting, and I repeated myself numerous times, was I wanted us to develop a plan that, if challenged, was ironclad, or that could be as close as ironclad as possible. And I believe the process that we took to select sites, to develop the plan, makes it very difficult to challenge. Doesn't mean it won't be challenged, but it probably will. But I don't believe there's anything in the plan that we've set forth is going to be easy for any challenger to overturn anything that we've put in the plan. And we've looked at that point more so than anything else, and that was the ultimate goal, as me as chairman for this master plan subcommittee, to make sure that we achieved. And I think we did do that. And I just want you to be assured that that was the foremost goal in our mind. That, and we understand there's things that could come up that we don't foresee, but you know what? I think this plan is solid.
I have every faith in you personally. I believe, I've heard you say that, and I believe you believe that. But I have also seen what's happened with the whole history of Howell Township and COA, and I will never rest easy. I see all the damage done, all the money that it's cost us, all the high density that the developers have gotten, that they, at the sacrifice or the cost, the expense of our land and our people. I'd like to ask a question that maybe Jennifer can answer and not cringe and wish I'd go away, but I won't. I haven't heard anything of any of the rentals sites about bedrooms per unit.
I had the opposite that I normally have. The DCA has specific bedroom distribution requirements for affordable units. No more than 20% can be, 20% can be ones, no less than 20% can be threes, and the balance twos. And that is set forth in the
and that's the way it is, will be in the agreement. Yes. I have some questions for you, and please don't misunderstand. You seem to give the impression, and you have said specifically to people asking questions and to the board, that certain things can be addressed at site plan. Sure they can, but no they can't. Not in these, because each individual one will have specifics. And every one that I have sat on, and there have been quite a few in the 15 years I was on the planning board, were very restricted. No buffers where there should be 50-foot buffers. No allowances for certain streams and waterways. All of our ordinances, rules, and regulations have not been maintained. They have been lessened to a great deal, not a small percentage. And each thing is with each site, there'll be an ordinance. And each ordinance will have specifics. Stop me if I'm incorrect.
That's correct.
The public doesn't have any input beforehand.
That's not correct. There's a public process in the adoption of an ordinance.
Right.
At this venue and at the governing body, there has to be a public hearing before any ordinance.
That's not what I mean. The public won't know. They won't know how they will be impacted. They won't see a proposed site plan. That's what I said, don't misunderstand. I know I've been through many of them. And there has not been an opportunity for somebody to get up and explain how they will be impacted, because they won't know how they will be impacted until site plan time. And then how many times, my heart broke for certain people because we couldn't do a thing. We could ask, we could beg, and sometime the applicant, out of the goodness of their heart, went above and beyond, at least a little bit. But the condos on Howell Road, for instance, have a 15-foot buffer between rural farms and high-density condos, 150-some condos. It's not fair, it's not right. I'd like to prevent that from happening again. And I'd like to know what precautions can be made in each of those ordinances to allow people. People aren't, noticed that this is going to impact them. There's a public notice, a legal public notice that's minimal. They don't know this is going to come next door or down the road a little ways, so that they can't speak at the time of that ordinance. And then that ordinance might have to be changed and re-advertised, and the governing body hesitates to do all that. And then there's a time restriction. Maybe I'm not saying we shouldn't have a plan. I'm just concerned about what happens. I hope you can understand and appreciate that. Because, Jennifer, you really didn't give the right, or a thorough enough, in my opinion, answer to Bob's questions about that. I saw the look in his eye. He looked like he relaxed, like he was going to have an opportunity at these site plans to make sure everything was according to Hoyle, let's say.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I can, and I just want to interject a little bit. Do we have to give concessions in the ordinances for these affordable units, or can we hold them to the current standards that are required by our current ordinances?
Well, none of the sites maintain the zoning for this type of development. So a developer's agreement is going to have to be entered into with the township and each individual applicant. There's a couple of disparities that I think that need to be clarified. Number one, nothing that we do here precludes the DEP from regulating environmental resources. So at the end of the day, we can put whatever restriction we want to do or relax whatever restriction we want to do, but an LOI is an LOI, a general permit is a general permit, a flood hazard permit is a flood hazard permit, and we really don't have the regulatory purview to adjust that in any way. So I think that when Mr. DeCastro had brought up some concerns about wetlands, et cetera, those are issues that will be addressed by whatever applicant. They don't really have a choice. That's imposed on them by the state. But through that developer's agreement process, in theory, or it's something that we would recommend, is that a sketch, a concept plan be provided in order to create these parameters. At that time, all of these things can be taken into consideration, and appropriate provisions can be put into place.
So it's not going to be ordinances in the blind, Ms. Smith, where I kind of feel that you're precluding that these are all going to be done haphazardly with...
Oh, I'm sure they're not going to be haphazard. But it's been my experience, and I have learned through participating that one hand doesn't always know what the other hand is doing. That, and I don't know how many times that I've heard Ron admonish the board while I was on it and not on it, that the applicant is required to do certain things they don't have to do anymore. Perhaps something like in each ordinance, in each agreement with each applicant for these sites, that they were asked to particularly notice surrounding owners.
Mr. Chair, well...
No, they don't have to before the ordinance.
Okay.
Only the site plan.
Mr. Cuchero, please. Thank you.
This board has limited jurisdiction in these matters, and the board's exclusive jurisdiction here is the adoption of the fair share plan. The putting together the ordinance, which I agree with Mrs. Smith, that's the devil's in the details, and that's where the details are made. That is a governing body. That is the governing body's jurisdiction. This board can't impose on the governing body how it's going to hold its hearings for the adoption of an ordinance, or whether it's going to make the governing body compel the developer to provide a notice. That's beyond the law. We just can't do that. I think what Jen said, though, is useful, that in the agreements that the developers will sign, that concept plans be made available so that there's some illustrative depiction of how these projects are going to impact property owners. But we can't, as a planning board, put into the plan that certain notice requirements are going to be imposed on the developers or the township council.
I know you can't impose it, but you can always make suggestions. And just by making someone aware is all it takes sometimes. That's why experience is a good thing, I think.
Thank you. That's a point well taken. Before you move on, I do want to make one comment, though. I believe, not only do I believe, I know that the upfront homework was done on every single one of these sites to make sure that the amount of units that have been proposed meet the ordinances that are in place. I don't know if that was done in the past. For instance, there's a site here with, please let me finish.
I wasn't going to say anything, I was just getting comfortable.
There's a site here where a developer proposed that he would be able to build 84 units. He was told that he wouldn't be able to build 84 units based on his proximity to streams and the required buffers that are in place in our ordinances today. So we reduced the amount of units he can build. So that's a step in the right direction.
Yes, it is.
The upfront homework, and I'm telling you, the upfront homework was done in this plan.
Okay, with all good intentions, I believe that the good intentions were there. As I said, don't misunderstand. I'm just trying to make suggestions or bring things up so that I know everybody understands. And as far as that site goes on Wyckoff Mills Road, I have some questions there.
Mrs. Smith, we do have some other people in the public, so you've been speaking for about almost 15 minutes, so can you please
Have I
wrap it up?
repeated anything anybody said?
No, you haven't, but we do have to be fair to the others in the audience. Thank you.
I guess you don't like what I have to say.
That has nothing to do with it. We're just trying to run a meeting. Thank you.
Okay, then I'll just make some points about that site. Toward the end of Jennifer's report, you had her put on record that every effort was made to not concentrate on one area of the township. Are any of you aware that within a mile or even less, there are already in excess of 600 units on approximately 120 acres that were protected and produced by COA agreements. By the way, none of them were produced one COA credit. They were all the fair market that developers received because they were part of the plan. And they're all, well, one's across the road and two others are approximately a mile away. Don't you think that we have more than our share of high density brought about by COA without 60 more units?
Mr. Chair, if I may,
I think she was at, Mr. Vislaki, I think she was asking me that question because she was relating to my comments. So if you wouldn't mind,
Sure.
I'll respond to that.
Mr. Chair, just before you do, I also, and all board members are free to answer whatever they want, but the cross-examination here is meant towards the board's professionals who have made the presentations. You're free to respond to the board, but the board members are not up for cross-examination tonight.
Well, it's okay. I'll answer the question. You made an interesting comment that I don't think anybody on this board was a party to. They're high-density units, but they're not included for COA credit. So we weren't a party to that. But what I will tell you is that we reviewed every single solitary dwelling that has gotten a COA credit, whether it was in inclusionary housing or hasn't been. And we looked at every single part of the town. So yes, I am comfortable, and you're asking me a personal question, and I'm opining that I am comfortable that the town, the entire town, is burdening their fair share. I can't account for developments that don't have COA credit but are high density.
They're part of the plan. They were brought about by COA.
Mrs. Smith, can you move on to your next question? Thank you.
You don't accept that as well, how can I put it? A burden brought on to the township, especially a small part of the township by COA?
I think COA is a burden to the entire township. COA isn't a burden to the entire state of New Jersey. So,
That's true.
Mr. Chair, again, I don't know if these sites were ever presented as 100% affordable sites. I think they were presented as inclusionary at that time. So that's why no COA units got bought, because what happens is the developers just put money into the fund and didn't have to build it.
No,
Let me tell you this,
that's not.
Mrs. Smith, with this process, we had all these sites that were presented to us. And I made it a point at the beginning of this process that I did not want to know lots, blocks, owners, or anything. All these properties were known to each one of the master plan subcommittee members as A, B, C, D, E, F, and G.
understand that.
And we looked at the site suitability criteria set forth by COA, and we selected the sites based on the site criteria and the ones that offered the most 100% affordable units. We didn't want to have to build any market rate units. So when it comes to areas that you're saying are highly dense, that was not done per se by anything within this plan. This was based on site suitability, and these sites were selected based on site suitability. If it so happens that there's a density in one particular area, and it's a shame that those areas that were designated as COA, there's a COA site right by my house that never had one single affordable unit. Well, you know what? It is the goal of this board to make sure that that doesn't happen ever again. And that's what we've set forth in this plan.
I don't agree with it in this particular site, simply because that is not a fact. It's already overly impacted by COA. It doesn't matter
But it
that
was
they're
an
fair market
those were
values.
inclusionary
No,
sites.
they were not inclusionary.
Yes.
okay,
No, they were
Mrs.
not.
Mrs. Smith,
They were
we
supposed to
understand that
build
you don't agree-
elsewhere.
Mrs. Smith, we understand
You
that you don't agree
understand
with
and
it.
you don't care. Thank you.
Chairman, can somebody please explain the PA2 to me?
Jennifer,
The planning
Before-
areas.
Before we start, just for the record, that was Mrs. Dixell who participated earlier, just asking our planner to explain planning area 2.
thank you.
The Department of Community Affairs at the state and a separate group, Office of Smart Growth, puts forward a state development and redevelopment plan. This is supposed to happen every 6 years. It doesn't work out that way, but they are the ones, the state is the entity that establishes the planning areas, and it's based upon population, a lot of demographic information, potential employment centers, proximity to infrastructure, and those types of things. And so there's a set of criteria that are taken into consideration. They come up with this mapping, and they go through a process called cross-acceptance, where they utilize the county, and the county comes forward and meets up with each individual municipality and assesses what they've done. To date, this process on the most current plan has happened, I think, 3 or 4 times. Nothing has actually happened with that. They go through cross-acceptance, then they change the map, then they start again. So it's promulgated by the state. I can actually provide you, I don't have it with me today, but I can give you a copy of that the next time I see you that shows you all the criteria that they use and how they assess it. Each individual planning area has its own set of information.
After the public. I'll reopen.
That's a factor, but not primarily. It's primarily population, employment within a square mile, those types of things.
I'll be glad to take that, because
Sure.
I'll take it for myself.
No
Thank you very
problem.
much for your help.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public portion at this point and reopen it for comment from board members. I believe that Mr. Nicastro has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer, one of my main concerns, and reason why I brought up that line of questioning earlier mentioned by Mrs. Smith about, can the subject plan change, was because I sat on a subcommittee, and I understood why we did the matrix. But I was a firm believer that whenever I make a decision, I have to make a decision on the whole picture. And one of the things we never got were conceptual plans, and I always stressed during the hearings that we had in the subcommittee was what was going to be the density. I didn't get the full picture. So that was one of my concerns and what I battled with when I had to come and decide whether I was going to vote for this plan or not, because I didn't get the whole picture. With that said, and you made your statements about, you know, the state's LOIs and all that stuff that has to still go through, gave me some comfort. But the other comfort I get is because now that we have Mrs. Dalton on the board as the liaison to the council, I would hope that we've learned from past mistakes. So when they start producing these ordinances, I know Ms. Dalton, and we don't have a Class 1 rep, is going to go and say, okay, now when these ordinances are going to be adopted, that they're going to have conceptual plans. At least that's my hope. And I think we're going to learn from past mistakes. So although I struggled to have to approve, you know, to vote on this because I didn't have the whole picture, I think we're going to learn from our mistakes. I know Mrs. Dalton, she's very thorough, and I know she's going to bring that to the table. And I think we're going to learn from those mistakes from the past. That's all Mrs. Smith is asking, and believe me, that's all I'm asking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Any other comment?
Mr. Chair, I just would be remiss if I didn't thank the members of the subcommittee, of the Master Plan Subcommittee, Mr. Nicastro, Mr. Sayre, Mr. Burgess, for the time that they put in, our professionals. It was one of the biggest undertakings we had to take, and I think everybody just gave it all their input, and I'm pleased what came forth, and I think it's one of the best solar plans that I've seen us come forward with.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Tantillo?
Yeah, I just would like to say, I've been in this town over 4 decades, and I've seen a lot of planning boards. I've seen a lot of this stuff go on. And I'd like to congratulate Mr. Viscolaki for the time he's put in and the effort he's put into this, and Mrs. Beam and all our professionals. I think this is the first time in a long time that a planning board in Howell Township really went to the end to get the best out of something. And I want to thank you always.
You're welcome. I have, is there any other comments? I do, yes.
Last of the thank yous, but truly, this plan was a lot of hard work. It's clear. It took, can't tell you how many hours going through this in detail. I can tell you from seeing the work that you put together and seeing the time you put together, we all know how we feel about COA, but it's clear that everyone worked very hard, and I appreciate the board members, because this is a lot of time. You guys spent nights, weekends, you spent a lot of time, and I personally like to thank you all for stepping up and doing the hard job that a lot of people do not want to do. So a personal thank you for all this hard work.
Any other comment? I do want to address a comment because it's kind of near and dear to me that I believe Mrs. Wisner made about all inclusionary rental projects. I want to, we tried very hard to strike a balance. So I'm very sensitive to the fact that if you build an inclusionary rental project, does it have a stigma? So the first thing I did was got in my car and drove to Wall, which is pretty close, and looked at one of these projects that the Ingerman Group built and is managing, and it was extremely nice. As a matter of fact, it puts some of the condominium projects in Howell Township to shame. Then I got in my car and drove to Roxbury, New Jersey, because there's a larger one there, and I got the same impression. Then I sat back and said, well, for the last 3 years that I've been following some of the land use in town, we are already building inclusionary COA units inside of developments that are already in place. So we are trying to meet the spirit of having a community that's not for lack of using a dirty word, segregated. So then I took a look at how many units we would have to build if we only used the inclusionary traditional zoning alternative, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. So with the fact that we are doing some inclusionary housing now, and the quality of the projects that I went to go look at, I'm very comfortable with the rental, inclusionary rental units. I think the strength of there's a lot to be said for the strength of the developer behind it, and I had the ability to do some research about the developer and look at some of their projects. So I know that that's a concern of the public, and it's a warranted concern. But I think that we've done the best we could to address that concern without building a multitude of market rate units in a total inclusionary COLA plan. Again, I want to thank everyone for the time and effort they put into this plan. I want to thank our volunteers who have, in my opinion, gone above and beyond the call of duty. Weekends, emails, phone calls, meetings, site reviews, and also the general agita and trepidation when decisions like this that have to affect the town are made. I do want to thank you. I think our professionals did a thorough job. They answered our questions in total. When we disagreed with what they had to say, they either acquiesced or proved why we couldn't have what we wanted in a sufficient manner. So I want to thank everyone across the board. I want to thank the public for coming out. I'm proud to live in a community where people care. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else where people would just stand by apathetically and let things happen without involvement. That being said, I'm going to ask for comment one more time. Any other comment? Well, I'll entertain a motion, depending on what the board's pleasure is on the fair share plan.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we accept this fair share element of the master plan.
I second that.
We have a motion moved by Vislaki, second by Tantillo.
Roll call. Mr. Frazee?
Yes.
Mr. Nacastro?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Tantillo?
Yes.
Mr. Vislaki?
Yes.
Mr. Boivai?
Yes.
Mrs. Clark?
Yes.
Mrs. Dalton?
Yes.
Chairman Estevez?
Yes.
The fair share plan is adopted.
Thank you. Ron, this is a special meeting, so I'm assuming that we don't have occasion to go into executive.
That's correct.
I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Dalton and Mr. Nacastro.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.